The Tale of the Wizard and the Lost Ancient Texts, The Light of Owlwood. Prologue. What she sought was the note her grandfather had left behind, containing the only countermeasure. Geen remained unmoved, as if he knew Lillian's every move. A man in a blue cloak stood in front of the counter of an old second-hand bookstore in the town of Owlwood. "I won't let you interfere," Lillian stated firmly. She clutched her talisman and reached for the drawer behind the counter. The air around him began to warp, as if it were superheated metal. The books lined up on the old bookstore's shelves fluttered, their pages rustling. With a trembling hand, Lillian pulled out a crumpled parchment note from the drawer. Mist of silence, conceal knowledge. Confuse sight, return to shadow. Incantation medium. The shop's old scent and deep breath. The note contained only a single spell. Medium, scent, and breath. Lillian took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust and ink from the bookstore's volumes. Clutching the talisman, she strongly chanted the words written on the note in her mind. At that moment, a warm, yet uncontrollable surge of magic erupted from within Lillian like a flood. Her pale gray eyes glowed a strong silver. Ignis, Nebula, Obscura, Vestus, Fugam Prebe, Fire Mist, Dark Garment, Provide Escape. The magic enveloped the entire bookstore, the Tree of Knowledge, in a deep fog. It wasn't the usual mist covering the town of Owlwood, but a dense, incan-dust-stained fog. The mist absorbed sound and completely blocked visibility. Gein's figure was swallowed and vanished instantly. Chia-Chi Gein's click of the tongue was audible from beyond the mist. The mist of silence was not merely a distraction. It was a powerful illusion spell, temporarily nullifying his seeking magic. The spell's recoil hit Lillian with a fierce dizziness. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and the reaction threatened to drain all strength from her, nearly immobilizing her. However, her talisman, with a faint vibration, gave her vitality. Her witch's instinct understood that this talisman was preventing and controlling her magic from running wild. Now, without hesitation, Lillian snatched the old fur cloak and small leather pouch kept behind the counter. Inside were a few essential coins, a small map left by her grandfather, and a bronze key she had called her treasure since childhood. Treading on the creaking floorboards, Lillian headed for the emergency exit at the back of the shop. The back door led to a narrow alley used for taking out the bookstore's trash. She opened the heavy wooden door and inhaled the damp outside air. Boom! An explosion echoed from inside the shop behind her. It was the sound of Gein forcefully blasting the mist away with a spell. The mist of silence dissipated, and several shelves inside the shop collapsed. Lillian didn't look back and sprinted down the alley. The place she fled to was a labyrinth of complex back streets. Outside the heart of Owlwood, a place known only to her, who had been born and raised in this town, where not even the light of the gas lamps could reach. After running at full speed for a while, Lillian ducked and hid in the shadow of an old stone water tower. Pulling the hood of her cloak deep over her head, she regulated her breathing. It's okay. He hasn't caught up. But her relief was brief. A faint pale blue flash appeared at the entrance of the alley where she was hiding, and simultaneously, Geen materialized from the opposite side. He slightly adjusted his hood. His keen gaze, like a flash, slid along the damp alley wall as if it were a living thing. It was his detection magic. Her talisman, which she gripped tightly as she held her breath, grew faintly warm. Geen stopped just before the water tower where Lillian was concealed. The scent of old blood cannot be hidden by mist. I know you're there, Lillian Vale. His voice was quiet, but magic began to gather behind him, and the surrounding atmosphere started to warp again. Gein slowly approached the water tower. I have to run, but how? Lillian looked around, but the alley walls were just stained with decades of rain and soot. Suddenly, her gaze was drawn to the wet gravel scattered at her feet. A magical phrase her grandfather had taught her as a child flashed into Lillian's mind. Fear not small changes. Everything begins with flexibility, was her grandfather's favorite saying. Clutching the talisman, Lillian picked up a few wet pebbles and concentrated her mind on them. Her silver eyes glowed faintly again. Flumen tenue. Forma falsa. Flow gently. False form. As Lillian chanted the spell, The pebbles in her hand instantly twisted and changed shape, transforming into several small projectiles that reflected light like mercury. The projectiles were soundlessly launched at a stack of wooden crates blocking the alley behind Geen. Upon impact, they collapsed, fiercely spewing steam. Gaga. The collapse of the wooden crates, the steam and the dense vapor from the magic created confusion. Lillian seized this moment, slipped through a narrow iron grating behind the water tower, and burst onto the adjacent street lined with old shops. To shake off her pursuer, she avoided merging onto the main street, heading further into the back alleys. Gian wasn't just searching for her. He believed Lillian was the key to finding the ancient texts, the compass of truth. Grandpa said this book was a family heirloom, but to be targeted by such a terrifying man. Running, Lillian opened the map in her leather pouch, checking the main buildings of Owlwood and the map's markings. One of them pointed to an old clock tower on the northeastern edge of the town. When you're in trouble, visit Silas. True knowledge is found in the flow of time. Her grandfather often spoke of him. Silas was her grandfather's old friend and the eccentric clockmaker. Silas Clock, the only person in this town who knew about her grandfather's work. His workshop was the only place Lillian could rely on now. Lillian regulated her breathing and pulled up the collar of her cloak. Her damp cheeks bore a mix of the humid Owlwood mist, fear, and a stirring sense of exhilaration. I won't run from magic anymore. I will protect this town and what Grandpa wanted to protect. A small shop, dimly lit by a lamp, at the end of an alley sandwiched between tall buildings. Finally, she met Silas. It was a quaint, dilapidated clock shop made of clean brick and tile. Silas shared old work stories with Lillian, along with tips and warnings about the dangers of magic. They talked for a while. Silas's clock shop was a mysterious place filled with antique clocks, smelling of old oil. The chiming of hundreds of antique clocks, all marking different times, echoed in the shop. Several clockwork mechanisms played a stirring, slightly off-key melody. The time talisman Silas gave her was cold and reassuringly heavy. Leaving the shop, Lillian said, "Thank you, Uncle Silas," and began to climb the spiral stairs again. She was no longer just a bookstore owner. She was the awakening young sorceress, protecting the ancient seal of Owlwood. Carrying her resolve, the clock tower pendulum continued to tick quietly and powerfully. Chapter 1: The Lost Secrets of Owlwood. 1. The Palace of Knowledge, and the First Key. The Owlwood City Library stood at the very end of the main street, in the oldest and most dignified part of town, with its clean, polished white marble walls, high ceilings, and tens of thousands of books stacked up to the ceiling. This serene and solemn vault of knowledge was Lillian's favorite place in Owlwood. Lillian, her cloak hood pulled low, hid by the library's back entrance, long after closing hours. The key must be hidden in the library's oldest knowledge. She recalled Silas's words, taking out the bronze key again. Fine ancient script was engraved on the key's surface. She compared the script with the red mark on her grandfather's map of the library. The red mark indicated the section known as the Restricted Archives. This archive housed the oldest of the ancient texts, passed down since the town's founding, forbidden even to historians. I need to figure out how to get in. The main entrance is too heavily guarded. Lillian carefully observed the library building. The outer walls were thick, and the windows were small and covered with iron bars. However, she remembered exploring every corner of this library with her grandfather when she was a child. There it is. The old ventilation shaft in the west wing. Lillian knew there was a small, sooty ventilation shaft near the window of a seldom-used reference room on the second floor of the west wing. Before, she had secretly sneaked in through that shaft with her grandfather to study old astronomical materials that were not publicly available. Lillian took a small hemp rope and a grappling hook from her cloak. These were items her grandfather had given her to use for retrieving old books. She threw the hook against the library's thick marble wall. With a single try, the hook caught in a small gap. Lillian began to climb the rope. In the stillness of the night-shrouded town, only her breathing and the creaking of the rope could be heard. As she climbed, she focused her consciousness on the time talisman in her palm. The talisman made a faint phantom tick-tock sound, working to conceal her presence from Gein's detection magic. Reaching close to the window frame, She tried to remove the iron grating of the ventilation shaft. However, the bolts were old and rusty, and she couldn't move them with her strength. Ugh, to be stuck here. Lillian again focused on the magic within her body. The magic of subtle change taught by her grandfather. What she needed now was to temporarily alter the bolt's hardness. Clutching the talisman, Lillian touched the bolt. A silver light flowed from her fingertip to the bolt. Pheramol, vapor calidus. Soft iron, hot steam. Iron soften, hot steam, be infused, she chanted. When the spell activated, the air around the bolt instantly became hot, and the rusty bolt softened, melting slightly like butter. Lillian quickly used the tip of the rope's grappling hook to twist the bolt. With a faint creaking sound, the iron grating came off. She slipped through the ventilation shaft into the reference room. The interior was dusty, and only the light from the gas lamps outside the window illuminated the corners of the room. Lillian left the reference room and proceeded to the library's main reading hall. The reading hall was a maze of ceiling-high bookshelves, imbued with a solemn atmosphere. The restricted archives are in the north side of the basement. She went down the stairs, proceeding through a dimly lit underground passage. Wary of the possibility of Guine having gotten ahead of her, Lillian focused on every shadow. A complex brass lock secured the heavy wooden door of the restricted archives. It wouldn't open with a normal key. Lillian brought the bronze key close to the lock. The ancient script engraved on the key's surface resonated with the brass of the lock, emitting a pale green light. So, this key truly is the key to open the first key. Lillian pressed the bronze key into a star-shaped indentation engraved on the brass surface of the lock. The light intensified, and with a click, the lock opened. When she opened the door, it was a space where time seemed to have stopped. The air was dry, filled with the scent of precious parchment that detested humidity. The shelves held records of lost civilizations from before the founding of Owlwood. Lillian walked toward the position indicated on her grandfather's map. The destination was a single, peculiar volume placed on an ebony pedestal at the very back of the archive. Unlike normal ancient texts, it was made of stone slabs instead of leather, and a complex magic circle was carved on the cover. The book's name, the Book of the Sands of Time. This is one of the keys Uncle Silas mentioned. The moment Lillian touched the Book of the Sands of Time, centuries of time rushed into her mind like a sandstorm. The primeval forest, a torrent of magic, the founders of the clan, wizards drawing a gigantic star map, and the silver dome of light covering this town. It was the memory of Owlwood's history, stored in this book. In that stream of memories, Lillian understood the true meaning of her grandfather's map. The compass of truth was not a device to control the town's magic. It was a switch to activate the gigantic magical system that sealed the town, and to activate the compass, 3 keys, including the Book of the Sands of Time, had to be resealed at their corresponding sources of magic. Just as Lillian picked up the volume and tried to lift it from the pedestal, the heavy door of the restricted archives was blown off its hinges with a roar. 2. Re-encounter with the intruder, Guine. Lillian spun around. Amidst the flying door fragments, Guine, his deep blue cloak swirling, stood quietly. His eyes were fixed on the Book of the Sands of Time that Lillian was holding. I made it in time, Lillian Vale. Guine took a step forward. Black smoke rose from beneath his feet, contaminating the sacred air of the archives. How did you find this place? Lillian's voice trembled with surprise and anger. She had used the silent mist magic and the time talisman to impede his tracking. Guine wore a cynical smile. Your amateur magic is useless against me. The last spell you used was to cool the concrete. I read the temperature of the town's water pipes and identified the route you fled by the thermal residue. Guine had accurately predicted her next location from the remnants of her magic. His level of knowledge and magic far surpassed Lillian's imagination. The time talisman will only last a few tens of minutes at most. Your grandfather was overprotective, but not foolish. The bronze key you hold is the master key to break the seal's barrier, and that Book of the Sands of Time is the first activation device. Guine reached out his hand, handed over to me. Stop your futile resistance. Your bloodline's mission is over. Lillian clutched the book to her chest and backed away. I won't give it to you. This is not something to be handed over to people like you. Clutching the talisman, Lillian tried to chant the illusion spell she had used at the counter again. Ignis Nebula, Fire Mist. But before she could finish the incantation, Guy moved. He launched a needle of black obsidian from his fingertip. Whoosh! The needle flew toward Lillian at the speed of light. Lillian instinctively ducked, and the needle plunged into the bookshelf above her head. Crunch! The wood of the bookshelf instantly carbonized where the needle struck, collapsing and taking the surrounding books with it. The pile of books created a massive barrier between Lillian and Guy. Your defense is too slow, Vale, and amateurish. Guy made no attempt to conceal his irritation at the collapsed pile of books. He tried to obliterate the pile instantly, but Lillian didn't miss that momentary gap. Water change, one more time. Lillian concentrated her magic on the fine moisture contained in the archive's air. Her magic, amplified by the talisman's power, quickly responded to her intention. Aquasclera gelu rapido. Aquasclera rapid freeze. Water, solidify. Hurry, ice. The moment Guy raised his hand to eliminate the pile of books, Lillian activated the spell. The moisture floating in the archive's air instantly changed into sharp ice crystals, suddenly appearing around Guy. The ice crystals grazed the sleeve of Guy's cloak, temporarily freezing his movement. Clever. Guy's anger was evident. Lillian seized that moment of hesitation and ran toward a hidden door in the back wall of the restricted archives. It was a secret escape route her grandfather had told her about, leading from the library's basement to the town's underground passages. She jumped into the passage, clutching the Book of the Sands of Time, just before the door closed behind her. Lillian shouted at Guy, "I'll reseal the keys before you can activate the compass." Guy instantly shattered the ice restraint and glared fiercely at the door, where Lillian had vanished, useless. "Did you think I would give up on tracking you, Lillian Vale? The next time we meet will be your last." Guy followed the traces of magic Lillian had left and stood before the door, and a cold smile returned to his lips. "The first is the library, the second is the ruins in the forest, and the third is the ancient tree. Your actions are predictable. What a waste of time." Guy did not attempt to forcefully open the secret door where Lillian had hidden. Instead, he turned to the darkness, starting to search for another, more efficient way to grasp the entire layout of the passages spreading beneath Owlwood. Chapter 1: The Lost Secrets of Owlwood. 3. Underground Passage and the Resealing of the Book of the Sands of Time. The secret passage Lillian jumped into was narrow and humid. Moss grew on the stone walls, and cold water had pooled on the floor. Clutching the Book of the Sands of Time, she relied on the faint light of the time talisman and pressed on through the underground passage. This passage was part of the complex underground water system built by the ancient wizard clan to regulate Owlwood's flow of magic. Since her grandfather had taken her exploring it several times, Lillian was able to proceed without getting lost. After a few minutes, Lillian reached a small circular room at the end of the passage. In the center of the room was an ancient spring where natural water had accumulated, its surface faintly shimmering silver. Incomprehensible ancient script, carved by the town's founders, spiraled around the stone slab surrounding the spring. "This is where Uncle Silas said the key must be resealed," Lillian carefully placed the Book of the Sands of Time she was holding by the spring. A faint magical pulse could still be felt from the volume. She knelt and dipped her hands into the spring water. The water was surprisingly warm, gently healing the magical fatigue remaining in her body. Lillian took out her grandfather's map and overlaid it on the spring's diagram. The map showed the Vortex of Origin, an ancient magical symbol, drawn directly above the spring. The Vortex of Origin, the starting point of the torrent of magic. Lillian compared the magic circle carved on the book's stone cover with the ancient script on the stone slabs surrounding the spring. Resealing required an ancient spell, and Lillian's own magic as the medium. She took a deep breath and gripped the talisman. Then, tracing the script carved on the spring stone slab, she began to chant the spell in her mind. Fons aqui tempus, radit, nexus obscura and ciliat. Fountain water. Time returned. Dark connection. Be silent. As Lillian voiced the words of the spell, the water surface of the spring violently rippled, and the silver glow intensified. Then, a thin streak of silver light rose from the water surface and was drawn into the magic circle on the stone slab of the Book of the Sands of Time. As the book absorbed the spring's magic, its stone surface grew hot and vibrated strongly. Lillian gritted her teeth to endure the torrent of magic grew. The entire room was enveloped in a low groaning sound. This was the sound of the seal network, stretched across the entire town of Owlwood, reacting to the resealing ritual. The moment the ritual reached its climax, the aftermage of Gein's blue cloak appeared before Lillian's eyes, reflected through the spring's water surface. Damn it, he's still somewhere in these passages. Gein was not following the traces Lillian had left. He was reading the town's flow of magic itself, predicting her actions, and infiltrating the underground. He had a far more accurate grasp of the sealing network than Lillian did. Lillian exerted her final strength and completed the spell. Swoosh! The streak of silver light was completely absorbed by the book, and the Book of the Sands of Time returned to being a simple stone volume. The magic circle on its surface lost its light and fell silent. I succeeded. Lillian sank down, breathing a sigh of relief. With this, Gein could no longer use the Book of the Sands of Time to activate the compass. However, her relief was short. Clang! The stone wall at the room's entrance, farthest from the spring, was instantly engulfed in blue flame and collapsed. Rubble scattered into the circular room. From the debris, Gein in his blue cloak emerged with an unhurried stride. His eyes held not anger, but the irritation of a cold calculation gone wrong. Your movements are too fast, Lillian Vale, and you are more versed in the knowledge of the vortex of origin than I anticipated. Gein glanced at the Book of the Sands of Time lying by the spring. It's useless. You didn't destroy the first key, you resealed it. This book can no longer be used to activate the compass. Lillian scrambled to her feet. Though she was exhausted, she had to run. I still have 2 left. I won't hand over the second key. Gein scoffed at Lillian's words. I know the second. The spool of thread that sows shadows is hidden in the ruins deep within the Owlwood forest. The documents your grandfather left behind are already ancient texts that the Mirror Order of the Dawn has deciphered. Gein had completely grasped Lillian's next destination. He seemed to imply that the very fact Lillian had passed through this underground passage had saved him the trouble of detection. There is no way for you to outwit me anymore. Your next destination is predictable. Gein slowly advanced toward the spring. Lillian, backed against the spring, had lost her escape route. For the Mirror Order, 3 keys are not necessary to activate the compass. 2 are enough to destabilize the seal and partially siphon the magic. Gein raised his hand. Black lightning ran across the spring's water surface, surrounding Lillian. I will retrieve the Book of the Sands of Time here. And you. At that moment, the time talisman Lillian was wearing suddenly began to vibrate intensely. The vibration emanating from the talisman interfered with the space around Gein, temporarily disrupting his magic's deployment. The black lightning Gein had released instantly lost its direction and struck the stone wall of the spring's basin. Godson. As the wall, hit by the black lightning, collapsed, Lillian transmitted the talisman's vibration into the spring water at her feet. Vibratio maxima. Unde tenebrae. Maximum vibration. Waves that cover darkness. The spring water, receiving the talisman's vibration, suddenly swelled like a gigantic tsunami. The cold underground water rushed toward Gein with violent force. Useless. Gein deployed a massive defensive spell to negate the tsunami. But the water was not just water. It was water imbued with the magic of the vortex of origin that Lillian had just resealed. The tsunami engulfed Gein, shattering the membrane of his defensive spell. Gein, thrown off balance by the unexpectedly powerful wave of magic, was slammed against the stone wall. Lillian did not miss that momentary gap. Clutching the Book of the Sands of Time again, she jumped into the spring behind her. The water was cold, but she knew of another secret waterway hidden at the bottom of the spring. Seeing her swim into the depths of the waterway, Gein stood up, shaking off the water. His blue cloak was soaked, and his face showed irritation and a faint trace of pain. Damn the time talisman. Silas Gein did not pursue the waterway where Lillian had escaped. He knew how powerful the spring's magic was. Forcing a pursuit would deplete his own magic. Without even drying his soaked body, he passed through the hole in the collapsed wall of the circular room and returned to the underground passage. Next, I will certainly get the second key first. I'm heading straight for the ruins in the Owlwood forest. A cold light fixed on his next target settled in his eyes. Chapter 1. The Lost Secrets of Owlwood. 4. The Knowledge and Warning of Ally Silas. Lillian emerged from the spring's waterway and reached the hidden exit leading to the Owlwood forest just before dawn. The exit was concealed behind a tombstone in the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. She wrung out her cloak and, shaking her wet hair, ran back to Silas's clock tower. When Lillian knocked on the workshop door, Silas immediately opened it. The fatigue of a sleepless night was evident on his face, but he showed relief upon confirming Lillian's safety. "Lily, are you all right? I detected you leaving the spring with the clock tower's magical gauge. What about Gyn? I ran into him underground. I resealed the first key, the Book of the Sands of Time. But Gian knew that we were looking for the keys, and that the next location is the ruins in the forest." Silas listened to Lillian's report and sat down in front of the astronomical device. "As I thought, they have the old documents. The Mirror Order of the Dawn are the descendants of the wizards your clan once banished. They know the reverse side of your sealing knowledge." Lillian warmed herself in the corner of the workshop, listening to Silas's words. "Where is the second key? The spool of thread that sows shadows in the ruins." Gian might have gotten a head start. Silas traced the astronomical device with his finger and replied, "The spool is hidden in an ancient observatory in the ruins, called the Starwell. It is a device that records the shadow between the past and the present." "How can I reseal it?" "The spool of thread that sows shadows is resealed by touching the memory silt. The well in the ruins contains old magic water, where the Owlwood wizard clan accumulated their memories. Your own blood must touch that water for the spool to be sealed again." Lion hesitated at the fact that she would have to use her own blood as the magical medium. "And Lily, the second key is more dangerous than the first," Silas continued with a serious expression. "If Gyn manages to activate the spool, he will be able to manipulate the shadows of everyone living in Owlwood. People will be dominated by their past fears and suppressed memories, becoming agents of the Mirror Order." Silas's warning shocked Lillian. Mental domination was far more terrifying than physical destruction of the town. "I have to go to the forest immediately." Lillian stood up. Though her eyes showed fatigue, there was no hesitation. "Wait, Lily," Silas held her back. "Gyn is already heading for the forest, and he's not alone. There is another pursuer from the Mirror Order." Silas took out his pocket watch and opened it with a click. On the watch face, a map of Owlwood was indicated by small points of light. This time, Talisman doesn't just block the Mirror Order's detection. It can also read the time difference in the magical currents. Right now, Gyn is at the forest entrance, but another magical reaction is approaching from the north side of the forest. It's the second pursuer. Lillian's heart turned cold. Not just Gyn. Who is it? Vanessa, the Mirror Order's most ruthless assassin. She specializes in time manipulation magic. While Gyn is pursuing you head-on, she intends to distort the flow of time and get ahead of you. Lillian looked anew at the time talisman Silas held. This battle was not just a battle of strength, but a battle of time and knowledge. "I don't have time. If Vanessa gets ahead of me, I won't be able to reseal the spool, Uncle Silas. I'll head to the ruins via the old animal trail in the forest, where the town's flow of magic is thinnest. The oldest path, different from Gyn's direct route." Lillian, clutching the bronze key and the Book of the Sands of Time, opened the clock tower door again. Behind her, Silas quietly began to adjust the gears of the astronomical device. "Come back safely, Lily. Your victory is the only hope for Owlwood." Lillian engraved those words in her heart and ran into the dim mist before sunrise. Her next destination was the ruins in the Owlwood forest, where darkness and shadows reigned. Chapter 1. The Lost Secrets of Owlwood. 5. The Owlwood Forest, Time Distortion and the Animal Trail. The Owlwood Forest, adjacent to the town, was a perpetually dark place even at noon. The animal trail Lillian chose, in particular, was the oldest, most unseen place, far from the town's magical currents. The ground was muddy, and the giant ancient trees blocked the sunlight, keeping it constantly dim. Lillian put her hand in her cloak pocket and gripped the time talisman Silas had given her. The talisman ticked tick-tick at slightly irregular intervals, warning her of the approach of the second pursuer, Vanessa, just as Silas had warned. Vanessa uses time manipulation magic. She won't pursue linearly but will distort the flow of time to get ahead of me. Lillian ran relentlessly down the animal trail. Her movements were swift, but her fatigue was reaching its limit. The struggle with Gain underground and the consecutive spell activations had severely depleted her magic. As she went deeper into the forest, the talisman's tick-tick suddenly became irregular. Tick, tick, tick. A loud frantic sound, like a clock spring running wild, rang in Lillian's ears. She's here. Lillian stopped instinctively. When she looked up, the surrounding scenery began to distort like a heat haze shimmering in the sun. The leaves of the trees in front of her instantly turned autumn brown, and the next moment reverted to fresh, spring green. The mud at her feet turned into dry earth for a moment, then immediately returned to mud. The flow of time was shattered into countless fragments in the forest. There you are, guardian of Owlwood. A quiet yet sharp female voice echoed simultaneously from all directions in the forest. Vanessa, the owner of the voice, was nowhere to be seen. Hiding is useless. The flow of time is part of me. In this forest, you will get lost in the illusions of the past and the future. Lillian closed her eyes and sharpened all her senses. I must not trust my sight. The illusions are a byproduct of Vanessa's magic. I need to find the center of this time distortion. Lillian focused on the talisman's vibration. The direction where the vibration was strongest, that was the epicenter of the time distortion, and thus Vanessa's location. The talisman pointed toward a thicket to her back right. Lillian opened her eyes and concentrated her remaining magic toward that thicket. She chose the spell of changing the environment's density, which she had learned from her grandfather, Terra Crassa, air levies, heavy earth, light air. The moment Lillian chanted the spell, the density of the ground at one point in the thicket abruptly increased several-fold. That spot sank deeply, as if gravity had suddenly increased. Thud. From the thicket, Vanessa's slender body was slammed to the ground, accompanied by a sharp shriek. Since she specialized in time manipulation magic, her physical strength and defensive magic were vulnerable. Vanessa stood up, her face filled with rage, a silver dagger in her hand. Her eyes never paused for a moment, like an hourglass. You found me. I never expected you to use such primitive earth magic. Primitive, but sufficient to stop your time manipulation. Vanessa laughed. The laughter reached Lillian's ears simultaneously at two different times, past and future. Too late, unfortunately. As Vanessa brought her dagger down, the air around Lillian instantly tore. What Lillian saw were two aftermages: herself, running a few seconds ago, and herself lying collapsed a few seconds in the future. It was the deployment of a time bomb. Vanessa was compressing the time around Lillian, attempting to make Lillian's current movement collide with her future movement. Lillian realized she couldn't get caught in this time distortion. Feeling her magic fiercely draining away inside her, she exerted all her remaining strength and chanted a spell to change the surrounding light's density. Luxolida, scutum fausa, solid light, false shield. As Lillian chanted the spell, the surrounding light condensed, forming a subtly shimmering, glass-like membrane of light around her body. It wasn't a defensive spell. It was a disguise magic shield meant to temporarily reflect and distort the temporal information on which Vanessa's magic relied. The collision between Lillian's past and future movements was prevented by this false shield. Vanessa's time bomb exploded in mid-air, and the forest air instantly returned to normal time. Lillian fell to her knees from the light shield's backlash. Her magic was nearly exhausted. This is my chance. Confirming Lillian's fatigue, Vanessa readied her dagger for a final attack. At that moment, a low growl, like a beast roaring, echoed from deeper in the forest. Woo! It was the prelude to a massive destructive spell unleashed by Gain. He had noticed the magical reactions of Lillian and Vanessa's fight, and was heading straight for the ruins. mowing down the forest trees to aid Vanessa. Vanessa clicked her tongue. TCH Gyn is coming head on. This is unexpected. Lillian's magical reaction was too strong, so Gyn was rushing over. Vanessa had to decide in an instant whether to finish off Lillian or meet up with Gyn. Your life will be taken by Gyn. You can enjoy fearing the domination of the shadows. Vanessa plunged her dagger into the forest ground. The time around the dagger rapidly accelerated, and her body vanished into the distance instantly, leaving an afterimage. She had retreated deeper into the forest by accelerating time. Lillian exerted all her strength to stand up. She pressed on, deeper in the direction of the forest's destructive sound. The domination of the shadows. If I don't make it in time, the townspeople will. She knew the time remaining to her was almost gone. Chapter 2. The Pursuit of the Compass and the Ordeal. 1. The star well in the ruins and the spool of thread that sows shadows. By the time Lillian reached the ancient ruins hidden deep within the Owlwood forest, the sky was already faintly bright. The ruins were a ceremonial site used by the Owlwood wizard clan before they sealed the town. The structure, made of stacked stone blocks, was covered in ivy and enveloped in silence. Lillian cautiously headed for the center of the ruins, avoiding the path of the destructive magic Gyn had unleashed. There, as shown on her grandfather's map, was the Star Well. The Star Well was a massive stone circular observatory-like structure. In its center was a deeply dug well, its surface dark and non-reflective. It was a place constructed to reflect the trajectories of stars on the water surface at night. But as Silas had said, this well was for recording shadows. Lillian stood at the well's edge and held up the bronze key. The key resonated with the ancient constellation map carved on the stone slabs around the well, emitting a dark blue light. Go, 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 go. A heavy sound echoed from the bottom of the well, and a section of the well's side stone slabs slid open, revealing a small, hidden altar. On the altar lay an old spool, made of parchment. This was the second key, the spool of thread that sows shadows. The spool was smaller than Lillian had imagined, palm-sized, but the air around it was heavy, and a thin thread extending from the spool seemed to faintly absorb the surrounding shadows. Just as Lillian reached for the spool, doom! The thick stone wall blocking the entrance to the ruins was pulverized by an explosive force of magic. Rubble rained down on the stone slabs of the Star Well. Gyn, in his blue cloak, stood there. His face showed not fatigue or irritation, but the cold satisfaction of having finally cornered his prey. You're late, Lillian Vale. The time which only managed to buy time. No matter. Gyn walked across the ruined stone floor and approached the well. The spool of thread that sows shadows. I activated a part of this key before you arrived. What did you say? Lillian grabbed the spool and took a defensive stance. Look, Gyn pointed to the bottom of the well. Lillian tentatively looked into the well's bottom and saw a black silt-like substance floating on the dark water surface. That must be the memory silt Silas had spoken of. That silt was now faintly glowing due to Gyn's activation magic, and that light began to project an illusion around the well. The illusion displayed on the well's surrounding wall was the figure of Lillian's grandfather. Lillian, I never wanted to burden you with this curse of blood. Her grandfather looked directly at Lillian with a sorrowful expression. Grandpa Lillian almost reached out to the illusion. Goon explained coldly, this spool accumulates the shadows of memory of the townspeople in the well. What I activated is the memory of your grandfather's guilt. The shadow of the guilt that your clan monopolized the knowledge of the seal and concealed the town's truth. As Gyn's words echoed, the illusory grandfather pointed at Lillian. You too are a keeper of secrets. Do you intend to continue deceiving the town with that power? The illusory grandfather's words deeply pierced Lillian's heart. For a moment she forgot what she was fighting for. The shadow of her grandfather's memory struck at her deepest doubts. The Mirror Order's goal is to make the truth of this town public, and release the hidden magic that would also free you from the blood curse of your grandfather. Cooperate with me, Lillian Vale. Gyn, seeing Lillian's hesitation, pressed on. Lillian shook her head. She desperately fought against being dominated by fear and doubt. This is your trap. The truth doesn't matter. You just want to use the town's magic for the Mirror Order. Lillian, clutching the spool, jumped onto the well's edge. I will reseal it. I will purify this memory silt with my blood. Remembering Silas's words, Lillian took the terrifying step of pressing the fingertip that was touching the spool onto the memory silt at the bottom of the well. Chapter 2. The Pursuit of the Compass and the Ordeal. 2. The Ordeal of Memory and the Resealing of the Shadow. I will reseal it. I will purify this memory silt with my blood. Lillian, clutching the spool, jumped onto the well's edge. She looked directly at the dark memory silt, spreading at the bottom of the well, and the sorrowful illusion of her grandfather reflected on the water's surface. Stop, Lillian. Your blood, by touching this silt, will flood you with all the mistakes, all the tragic memories of your clan. You won't be able to bear it, Geen warned. Lillian ignored his words. The illusion of her grandfather now glared at her, his face contorted with anger. Foolish girl, I hid everything. The peace of this town is built upon lies. Your fight is hypocrisy. Lillian shouted at the illusion. It might be a lie, but you loved the town. The shadow of your suffering, having no choice but to keep the secret, is not your sin. I will accept your pain. Lillian forcefully cut her palm with the sharp corner of the bronze key. Hot blood dripped onto the dark memory silt at the bottom of the well. Sanguis vera, umbra, purga. Ligaming, true blood, purify shadow, eternal bond. The moment Lillian's blood touched the memory silt, the entire well flashed violently with a roar. Lillian's consciousness was instantly swallowed by a torrent of centuries of memories. What she saw was the origin of Owlwood, the site of the first Vale clan members building the town and sealing its rich magical energy to protect the land, and the tragedy of reluctantly banishing those who tried to break the seal and monopolize the magic, the ancestors of the Mirror Order of the Dawn. Furthermore, how much solitude and sacrifice her grandfather had endured to protect the secret of the compass. It wasn't just guilt, it was the memory of the endless burden of a guardian and hope for the future. The torrent of memories scourged Lillian's entire body, but she gritted her teeth and endured. The time talisman in her palm regulated the torrent of memories, preventing her soul from collapsing. A few seconds later, when Lillian regained consciousness, the memory silt at the bottom of the well had lost its black color and turned into clear, purified, magical water. The illusion of her grandfather vanished, and instead, her own determined face was reflected on the well's surface. The spool of thread that sews shadows she held, touched by her blood and the pure magical water, lost its light again and was resealed. Lillian, exhausted yet triumphant, sat down on the well's edge. Eugene, whose eyes had been temporarily burned by the magical light erupting from the well, wore an expression of utter fury. The black magic around him became disorderly, and the spell he was attempting to deploy suddenly broke free from his control and ran wild. The second key, too, but it's too late. Gyn instantly subdued the rampant magic and lunged toward Lillian. Lillian's body was immobilized by the backlash of the magical torrent. However, she channeled the purified magic she had gained from the well water into the constellation map carved on the well's stone slab. Sidus, Istabulus, Mori Solaris, stable star walls. Hurry. The moment Gyn was upon her, the stone slabs around the well vertically rose between Lillian and Gyn, as a massive stone wall. Thud. Gyn crashed into the stone wall and recoiled a few steps. The force was too great for even his physique to ignore. Lillian seized the moment the stone wall halted Gyn, and she sprinted at full speed toward the hidden forest exit behind the ruins. The third one? Gyn. I will absolutely not hand over the third key. Gyn pulverized the stone wall in front of him with black lightning, pursuing Lillian's back, but Lillian had already vanished into the deep thicket of the ruins. Chapter 2. The Pursuit of the Compass and the Ordeal. 3. The Ordeal of the Ancient Tree and the Return of the Time which Lillian, without rest, headed toward the deepest heart of the forest, the point where the town's magic was most concentrated. The last key was hidden in the clock of the ancient tree, a gigantic oak tree thousands of years old. That tree was said to be the center of the town's sealing network. As Lillian approached the ancient tree, the time talisman again began to tick violently and irregularly. Tick, tick, Vanessa. Lillian peered through the trees at the small clearing where the gigantic oak tree stood. There, standing at the base of the ancient oak, was Vanessa in her blue cloak. She held her palm over a complex magic circle drawn on the ground. The air around her was far more intensely distorted than in their previous encounter. "You're late, Lillian Vale. Guion is struggling, so I will end everything here." 3 shadows stood around Vanessa. They were after images of Vanessa herself, past, present, and future Vanessa. "This is the Chronos Trinity. I will attack your movements simultaneously from 3 aspects: past, present, and future. There is no escape." Lillian was aghast at the sight. Fighting 3 Vanessas with most of her magic spent was madness. Lillian looked toward the last key hidden at the base of the ancient tree, the ether bell. It was a small bronze bell embedded in the tree's roots. If she could reseal this bell, all 3 keys would be secured. "I have to touch the bell. But how can I evade the attacks of the 3 Vanessas?" Lillian concentrated her final magic on the 2 keys she held: the Book of the Sands of Time and the spool of thread that sows shadows, and the talisman in her palm. She gambled on changing the magical battlefield itself, rather than fighting head-on. "Your magic only works because the flow of time is stable." Lillian chanted her grandfather's spell, which had been concealed in the ground. "Gravitas stabilitas fuge." Gravity, increase. Stability, flee. The moment Lillian chanted the spell, the local gravity around the Vanessas suddenly increased several-fold. At the same time, the stability of the temporal axis on which their magic depended was shaken to its core. Wah heavy. The 3 Vanessas lost their balance due to the sudden change in gravity. The Chronos Trinity magic relied on extremely precise temporal alignment. With the spatial stability destroyed, their aftermages began to lose temporal synchronization. The aftermage of past Vanessa moved in a future motion, and present Vanessa vanished in the next instant. Their actions were disjointed. "Damn it, with such a primitive method," Vanessa roared. Lillian did not miss this momentary confusion. She crawled across the gravity-intensified ground, rushing toward the bell at the base of the ancient tree. Vanessa, enduring the gravity, swung her dagger down. Her dagger was supposed to shorten time and reach Lillian's neck instantly. However, just before that, Lillian slammed the spool of thread that sows shadows into the corner of the magic circle drawn on the ground. Clang. The moment the resealed spool touched the magic circle, the entire circle absorbed the shadow and ceased functioning. Vanessa's time magic activation device was destroyed. "It's over, Vanessa." Lillian pressed her forehead against the ether bell embedded in the ancient tree's roots and chanted the final spell. As Lillian's magic flowed into the bell began to emit a pale blue light like an armillary sphere. This bell was a device that controlled the flow of magic filling the air of Owlwood. When the bell finished emitting light, the 3 aftermages of Vanessa crumbled like sand and vanished. Numu Vanessa returned to her singular form, let out a shriek of intense fury. But her magic was completely depleted by Lillian's geomancy and time disruption spells. Lillian had resealed all 3 keys. She was barely standing, but her eyes held the glow of her first true victory. "I win, Vanessa. The compass can no longer be activated by anyone." Vanessa glared at Lillian, then, with an expression of humiliation, deployed dark magic and retreated deep into the forest. Her defeat signified a critical failure for the Mirror Order to buy time. Chapter 2. The Pursuit of the Compass and the Ordeal. 4. To the place of the end, return to the town center. Lillian, clutching the 3 keys: the Book of the Sands of Time, the spool of thread that sows shadows, and the ether bell tightly, leaned against the ancient tree and took deep breaths. Now, even if Guion gets the compass, he shouldn't be able to activate it. At that moment, the time talisman in her pocket began to tick-tick-tock again, quietly yet powerfully, at a steady rhythm. It indicated that a strong magical presence was waiting. Lillian focused her consciousness on the talisman to contact Silas. "Uncle Silas, I've resealed all 3 keys." Silas's tired yet relieved voice echoed through the talisman. "Well done, Lily. But danger remains. Guion has been heading for the town center, the city hall basement, immediately after the ruins. The compass is in the sealing center, hidden deep beneath the city hall." "I know. But he can't use the compass without the keys. No, Lily. Gain intends to use the very magic that resealed the keys. Resealing strengthens the seal, but it also activates it. Goin is trying to forcefully control the compass by touching it, stealing your resealing magic. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. My resealing of the keys has ironically given Guion his last chance. What should I do? Go to the City Hall basement. Do not let Guion touch the compass. If he touches it, your life and the magic of all 3 keys will be drained, and Owlwood will instantly become a magical void. Lillian hugged the 3 keys to her chest and stood up from the ancient tree's base. Her fatigue was at its peak, but her body was filled with the purified magic of the 3 keys, due to the resealing. That power was the last light of her bloodline, inherited to protect the town. She left the Owlwood forest, and began running at full speed toward the City Hall, the center of Owlwood where the mist was beginning to clear. The stage for the final battle was deep beneath the City Hall, the heart of the town where she grew up. Epilogue: the release of the seal and the final battle. 1. The center of the seal, the underground altar. The Owlwood City Hall was the administrative center of the town and the newest stone building. However, only Lillian's clan knew that deep beneath it lay an ancient ruin, the center of the seal, the very origin of the town. Lillian slipped past the City Hall security and found the hidden staircase marked on her grandfather's map, starting from the underground archive room. The humidity of the surrounding air increased, and she was enveloped in a solemn atmosphere, like an ancient ritual site. The bottom of the stairs. Lillian stepped into a massive circular room. It was truly an ancient altar. The entire room was covered by a gigantic dome-shaped stone slab, and underground water constantly dripped from the ceiling due to the weight of the building above. In the center of the altar lay a black obsidian pedestal, and upon it quietly rested the compass of truth, the object of the current conflict. The compass was a palm-sized metal disc, its surface engraved with the star map of Owlwood, and at its center was a single silver needle that always pointed not north, but to the depth of the altar's underground. And in front of the pedestal stood Gain. You came, after all, Lillian Vale. All your actions were predictable. Gain glanced at Lillian and paused, just before reaching out to the compass. I won't let you outwit me again, because you resealed the 3 keys. The compass is in its highest state of activation. All I need to do now is make the resealing magic of the keys you hold, touch the compass, and I can claim all the town's magic. Lillian clutched the 3 keys and maintained a distance from Gain. I won't let you take it. I will control the compass and reconstruct the town's seal. Foolish, the compass cannot be controlled by an amateur wizard like you. It is a tool of destruction for handling divinera magic. Gain ignored Lillian's words and drew a magic circle on the obsidian pedestal with his own blood. It was a magic absorption circle. If your keys won't come to me, then I will draw the keys' magic to me. As Gain began to chant a spell, dark magic surged from the altar's dome-shaped stone slab, stretching toward the 3 keys Lillian held, forming chain-like shapes. Come, my magic. Lillian decided to utilize the magic without letting Gain touch the keys. She released the 3 keys from her chest and slammed them onto 3 different stone pillars of the altar. 3-1, Nexus Estabois, Defende. 3B1, Stable Connection, Defend. The moment the 3 keys touched the stone pillars, the light released from the keys' silver, blue, pale blue collided with the dark chains released by Gain. A tremendous roar echoed throughout the altar. Lillian's magic and Gain's dark magic were locked in a stalemate in the center of the altar. Useless. Your resealing magic is only stable by touching the compass. Like this, the key's magic will become unstable and break the town's seal from within. Gain was right. Lillian's magic was only temporarily holding the key's power. Without the compass as a control device, the magic would run wild. Then, I will be the control device. Lillian sprinted toward the central pedestal, from the farthest point from the compass. Right in front of Gain, you idiot. Don't come closer, Gain shouted. Lillian avoided Gain's dark magic and launched herself from the altar floor. She charged straight toward the compass, through the torrent of light emanating from the 3 keys. Epilogue: the release of the seal and the final battle. 2. Control of the compass. The final showdown. The moment Lillian reached the compass's pedestal, Guy exerted his final strength and unleashed a massive dark spear toward her. Vanish. The dark spear hurtled toward Lillian. She could neither run nor chant a defensive spell. Touching the compass was the only way to end everything. Lillian grasped the compass with both hands. In that instant, the dark spear grazed Lillian's back and struck the altar's stone wall. The stone wall was pulverized, but Lillian was unharmed. The compass had formed a momentary magical shield around her. When Lillian touched the compass, its silver needle began to vibrate violently. The magic of the 3 keys flowed into her body through the compass, and her eyes glowed a pure silver. Magic of Owlwood, obey me. Clutching the compass, Lillian began to chant the ancient spell to reconstruct the town's seal in her mind. Mundus integra, sigillum aeternum, lux rodit, world be integrated, eternal seal, light return. Each time Lillian finished chanting the spell, the compass's silver needle pointed to a precise position on the star map, obeying her will. Seeing this sight, Geen felt fear for the first time. Impossible. An amateur wizard like you, controlling the compass. Geen concentrated his magic again and reached out to steal the compass from Lillian. But Lillian had already become one with the compass. She used the compass's magic to thrust countless stone pillars toward Geen from the altar's stone floor. Thud, thud. Geen was trapped in the maze of suddenly appearing stone pillars and couldn't get close to Lillian. Lillian raised the compass. You were right, Geen. I know the reason the mirror order was banished, and the sin of concealing the town's truth. That's why I won't make the same mistake you do. Lillian aligned the compass's needle to the final, most crucial point, the star position of reconstruction and harmony. Compass achieve reconstruction, not destruction. Shine, a pale blue warm light of life was released from the compass. The light pierced the altar's dome-shaped ceiling and spread over the entire town of Owlwood. This light was not the magic Geen tried to steal, but the town's very life force, purified by Lillian using the 3 keys. Engulfed in the light, Geen felt all his dark magic purified and his strength draining away. Why? Why does a tool of destruction produce harmony? Geen fell to his knees. His blue cloak was no longer an intimidating shadow, but just a wet piece of cloth. The compass is not a tool of destruction. It is a mirror reflecting the stars. The heart of the wielder reflects its true nature. Lillian channeled her final strength to operate the compass. The torrent of light enveloped the entire ceiling network of the town, reconstructing it strongly and gently. When the reconstruction was complete, the compass's light disappeared, and it returned to being an old bronze disc in Lillian's hands. The 3 keys also lost their power, becoming silent objects. Lillian, having used all her strength, collapsed on the spot, clutching the compass. Epilogue: The Light of Owlwood. 3. Conclusion: The Light of Owlwood. The next time Lillian woke up, she was in her room on the 2nd floor of the Tree of Knowledge bookstore. Bright sunlight streamed through the window outside. Silas Clock was sitting beside her. Uncle Silas. Lily, well done. You saved the town's seal. Silas smiled gently. Geen is the mirror orders. Magic was completely neutralized by the seal's reconstruction. Geen and Vanessa were banished to the silt of the flow of time, so they can never return to this town. They were completely defeated by your victory. Lillian sighed with relief and searched for the compass. The compass was placed on her bedside. It was just a disc that no longer emitted any magic. What will happen to the compass? Your clan's role is over, Lily. The compass used all its magic for the reconstruction when it touched your hands. It is now just a monument to the beginning. Silas placed the old bronze key in Lillian's palm. From now on, you are the guardian of Owlwood, but the seal is stable. You no longer need to be the keeper of secrets. The town will regain its peace, based not on lies, but on true harmony. Silas picked up the 3 keys Lillian had held and said, These keys no longer have magic. They are just old objects, but they are proof of your courage. Your new mission is to pass on this truth of the town to the next generation. A few days later, Lillian was standing behind the counter of the bookstore. The usual quiet had returned to the shop, and the scent of old books lingered. She opened the hidden drawer behind the counter and gently placed the compass and the 3 keys inside. Then, she opened the shop door. The usual mist hung over Owlwood, but it felt cleaner than before, carrying a silver light. Lillian continues to protect ancient knowledge as the owner of the Tree of Knowledge bookstore. However, sometimes, she walks the back alleys and the Owlwood forest unseen. Her pale gray eyes gaze at every corner of the town, stronger and gentler than before. She has become the light of Owlwood. No longer burdened by secrecy, but as a beacon of hope, she watches over the peace of this old town. The end. Stay tuned for next time,